Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you from sunny England, just south of London. Thanks very much for joining this webinar. My name is Andy Tobin. I'm the Vice President for Delivery for Evernym, and I've been with the company for just over 3 years now, since 2016, when there was 4 of us with some very big ideas, and we're just amazed to see how the market is moving and how momentum is picking up around this new concept of self-sovereign identity. What we're going to be talking about today is something really quite transformative. I'll be giving you a high-level overview of what self-sovereign identity is and what it isn't. It's a topic that's getting increasing attention from businesses, from researchers, and from analysts around the world. And normally, for a new technology, it might fit into a particular market sector or solve a particular pain point. But what we're describing today really transcends any single market or any geography. And once we finish this webinar, hopefully you'll be thinking about your own use cases. You'll be thinking about ideas just for new business models, possibly. And we're seeing this happen all the time as people understand more about what self-sovereign identity does for you, what it enables. They just think about some amazing things. And we've got some excellent examples of that coming up. Please ask any questions in the Q&A. As you'll see, we are being recorded. This is actually the second webinar we've done today. The first one was crazy busy and we had so many questions we couldn't get to them all, so we're going to send out an email with all of the questions hopefully answered. But drop them in. I see there's one now, Connect.me iOS app. Is it planned to be available in the Belgian App Store? Can't find it currently. So we've got it in for iOS in UK, Canada, and US right now, and we are opening it up to others. I think you can get Android everywhere, so maybe if you've got Android, take a look. But it is going to get opened out into more app stores shortly. For those that don't know, Connect.me is the first sovereign compatible app in the app stores. So let's fire away. First, what we're going to do, we're going to go back in time a little bit before the internet existed, and excuse me, before there were websites and before there was digital communication. And back then, in those days, people talked to each other, right? They interacted face to face. And if you're meeting somebody for the first time, one of the first questions you're asked is, who are you? Where are you from? Who sent you? Whatever it might be. And to answer these questions, people would carry things with them like special coins or colorful shells or waxed seal letters demanding free passage. And these days we have passports, we have driving licenses, we have membership cards, we have birth certificates and so on. Things that we carry with us, and we call them credentials. There's one thing you'll know if you're in the identity world, is that there's a lot of terminology here, and there's terminology like claims and attributes and so on. But credentials, after testing everything around in the market, credentials seem to be most understandable to most people. So we're calling these things credentials, right? Passports, driving licenses, credit card is a credential, a train ticket is a credential, etc., etc. So we're given these credentials by all sorts of organizations. Some of them we keep in our pockets all the time. Some of them we might keep in a drawer and we bring them out when we travel, like a passport. And some of them we could keep in a filing cabinet or a safe until we really need them. The common thing is they're ours to hold and manage and control who we show them to. And that's the common aspect to all of these credentials. And they answer the question, says who. If I arrive in the US, fly in, and there's a border guard there, he wants to know who I am. So I could say, look, I'm Andy Tobin, obviously. But what they want to know is who says you're Andy Tobin. Is there someone I trust, like the UK Passport Office, that says you're Andy Tobin? That's how the world works. And there's a common standard for these credentials around the world, which is paper. Paper can get you anywhere. You can fly to any country. You can go into a cinema. You can get a car. You can buy a house with pieces of paper. And okay, pieces of plastic as well. But these paper credentials don't work online. And since the internet began, there's been no open, standardized digital equivalent for these paper credentials. And that's really what causes the mess we're in. If you think about it, every digital interaction needs identity in some form to establish trust between the two parties. And as digital services have evolved, this lack of a digital equivalent for paper credentials has resulted in really complex problems and even more complex solutions and workarounds to try and fix them. So our current experience for digital identity is one of signing up for some new service by typing in lots of identity information into a website. We all know that, that's what we all do. That's how we've been kind of trained to think about how we get a new service. What we type, though, could be anything. If you want to book a flight and you're checking in, they ask for advanced passenger information. You can type anything in there. They have no way of checking until you get to the airport, and then you have to show them your passport. So one large airline organization we've been working with, they think that about 50% of advanced passenger information is wrong, is incorrect. Now, there's obvious things like Batman and Superman and Mickey Mouse that could be in there, but there's also misspellings and so on and so on. And therefore, they have to go to a lot of trouble to, once they've got the information, check if it's correct, and then they've got to check your passport again, then they've got to update the information, and so on and so on. So the business now has to spend money analyzing what you've typed in and determine if it's correct or not, and whether you're a real person or whether you're a bot. And this is bad for both businesses and for customers. Let's say eventually you get through all that and you get access to, in this case, a bank on the slide here. What do you get back? Well, you get a username and password. You'll probably forget that, but you certainly can't use that information anywhere else. Okay, it's unique to that bank. And what this means, so the implication is that you have identities everywhere that don't interoperate with each other. Because there's no global standard for digital identity, every service has to build its own identity system. And that means every business has to be expert in identity management in order to get anything done online. It's a bit like every business building its own internet in order to have a website, right? You'd never do that. Why on earth would you build your own internet to have a website? You just use the internet that's already there. So to think any differently in the internet world would be just crazy, right? But that's how things work in the identity world. With websites, every business just uses the internet because it's there, and there's protocols, and some clever people created it. And as long as you adhere to the protocols, it's fine. But in the identity space, that just doesn't work. And for people like you and me, it's a bit like us having to own a different car for every place we want to drive to. Right? That's what digital identity is like. You have a car to drive to work, then you have another car that only goes to your mum and dad's place, then you have another car that goes to the supermarket. It's absolutely insane and crazy the way digital identity has evolved. Why not just have your credentials like you have in your wallet and your filing cabinet, and you can show them to anybody? So there's some major consequences as a result of the weird way that digital identity has evolved. Every part of every business has a customer database. After a while, they realize maybe they need to connect these databases together, and they spend millions and millions trying to create a single view of the customer. But they don't realize the customer already has a single view of themselves. So they could just ask the customer. If the customer had credentials that they could present, that would be much easier. And some organizations obviously abuse the trust that's been placed in them. They sell your data, they use it for other purposes, or they don't secure customer data properly, resulting in breaches and hacking, and then the regulators catch up, and then you get stringent new processes you have to put in place that add even more friction to the whole thing. So you could really think of today's digital identity technologies as the killers of customer experience. That's really what is happening, and there's always been this trade-off, really, hasn't there? Everybody wants frictionless customer experience. But that has always resulted in low security. Everyone has always wanted high security, but they won't tolerate the disastrous user experience that results. So what if you can have both? What if you could have low friction and high security? How would things change? And this just doesn't apply only to consumer-facing businesses. The whole world of business-to-business commerce. How do you know your business is dealing with a supplier who's properly certified? How do you know your IoT device is the right IoT device? How does your IoT device know that that the new firmware it's getting isn't full of viruses? So it's a huge problem that covers both people, organizations, and things. And just as an example of the current state of the art, if you like, this is an architecture diagram from a European Commission funded project to show how a French citizen, so it's France on the right of the picture, can get an identity compatible with the European identity standard EIDAS. How that French citizen could then go to the UK and open a bank account. Each of these boxes that you see in this diagram is a system run by some organization somewhere. The French IDP on the right-hand side is obviously the key one because they do the identity proofing and checking that the French citizen is who they say they are. They then give that person an account, and the person goes to the UK and they want to open a bank account. That person then has to log in to their French identity provider through a series of different options they get presented with, and eventually some data gets transferred across all of these boxes and connections back to the bank in the UK. And there's 9 systems here that need to talk to each other. And of course, everyone here, all the boxes are commercial companies of some sort that need to get paid. And this simply isn't efficient and it doesn't scale. And one thing you'll notice is the French citizen is nowhere to be seen in this diagram. So wouldn't it be easier to do things like this, like we do with paper credentials? If that French identity provider can check who the citizen is and then give them a digital credential that that citizen can take with them, go to the UK and say, hey, I'd like to open a bank account. Well, they can open it remotely, it doesn't really matter, and present that data directly, just as they would do if they had a paper credential, but it's a digital one. That would be fantastic. It's much easier. There aren't lots of intermediaries in here that have to get paid, that have to have much care about who sees the data and so on. And of course, it's none of the business of the French identity provider where I use that credential, okay? Just as it isn't with a paper credential that I could use. And of course, once I have that credential, it can be used anywhere, for anything, anywhere in the world, just as you can with a paper credential. Now, of course, the recipient or the relying party needs to trust the source of the data, just as they do with paper credentials. Okay, if the the toll road doesn't trust that the French identity provider has done their job, then they're not going to let the person in, and that's what happens in the real world with physical paper credentials as well. So you need to have the ability to trust the cryptography that's ensuring you can verify the credential, the digital data you've been given, and you need to have human trust in the source of the data that they're doing their job. So that all seems very easy. It all seems really obvious, and you're probably thinking, why didn't we do this before? Why haven't we got this already, right? We're how many years into the internet? 20 years or something into the internet, probably more than that. Why aren't we all walking around with verifiable digital credentials that let us all establish these trusted private online relationships? And this is where self-sovereign identity comes in. Until now, you've not really had the combination of thought and technology and protocols that enable this to happen, which is why it's suddenly exploded, because now we have the capability, we have the technology, and we have the brain power to have created something new. It hasn't been really possible until now. So again, as in the way of the identity world, there's lots of terminology here, lots of different terms of things. So as well as self-sovereign identity, you'll hear decentralized identity or blockchain identity or self-owned identity. So what we're going to do is we're just going to cover what it is and how it works. So we're going to start, first of all, by debunking a few myths. Many people have got a completely wrong understanding of what SSI is. So I'll go through some of the things it definitely isn't first. You're still going to need passport offices, birth registries, and all those credential issuers that exist at the moment. The ones that issue paper credentials, right? They're still needed. But when they give you a paper credential, they're going to give you a digital one as well. Also, you're not going to rip up all the world's existing identity systems and throw them away. They're still going to exist, right? People aren't suddenly going to never need a paper passport again. People are still going to log in with usernames and passwords for some time, right? So what you're going to do is enhance these systems and make them better by adding self-sovereign identity to them. You definitely won't be putting personal data or even hashes of personal data onto any blockchain or ledger. So many reasons for that. There is a paper on the Evernym website in the library, if you scroll down the bottom, called What Goes on the Ledger. You can find it on sovereign.org as well. That's worth reading, because it explains what you would put on a ledger and what you definitely wouldn't and why. Also, self-sovereign identity isn't good at some things, right? And amazingly, the things it's not good at are the same things that physical identity documents are not good at. So for example, it doesn't work for no-fly lists. Or terror watch lists, in the same way that nobody is going to give me a credential saying I'm on a no-fly list, and when I go to an airport they say, oh, are you on the no-fly list? I say, yeah, please, here's my no-fly credential. Of course that doesn't work. So sort of blacklisting or negative lists like that, PEP and sanctioned lists for the finance industry, you can't force someone in this world of self-sovereign identity to reveal something if they don't want to, just like you can't in the physical world. It also means, also doesn't mean that you go around sort of self-attesting your nationality or your entitlement to drive, removing the need for governments. You're still going to need, as it says in the first point, these issuers of verifiable, meaningful credentials. Sure, you can attest to some things, like nobody knows other than you that you're a Liverpool fan, and that's fine, okay? But you probably can't use the fact you're a Liverpool fan to get into a country. So let's look now at what it is. Firstly, for people, it's the ability for people to manage and present, obtain, manage and present their own digitally verifiable credentials, just like we do with paper credentials. So it's, when you boil it down, it's really, really simple. I can get a paper credential, just give me a digital one as well. I can then decide where to put it. I can store it, I can look after it, just like I do with my paper credentials. But you get some digital superpowers that you've never really been able to have before. Because they're digital, you can back them up and recover them if you lose your phone. But also if your phone's stolen or lost, you can revoke your credentials and render them unusable. Plus, you can present only the data you need. So rather than showing everything in your driving license and to the doorman, who gets to see your address and find out where you live and then decide to come and attack you or whatever, you can then just present proof that you're over 18, or proof that you come from a certain country, or proof that you're allowed to board a plane, or proof that you're allowed to go in the cinema. You don't have to present the underlying data if you don't want to. And there's nobody between me and whoever I'm presenting the data to. There's no intermediaries. This world of connection brokers that we have at the moment that see everything, that goes away. Okay, we directly connect and we have a secure connection that's unique with nobody in the middle. Now, for organizations, it's the ability to issue credentials about anything to anyone, and the ability to request and verify digital credentials for anything. There's no central authority saying you can only issue a credential with a name, an address, and a date of birth in it. If you wanted to, as an organization, you can issue a credential to an employee that says they're allowed to access certain systems. You can issue a credential as a ticket to a pop concert. You could issue a credential as a passport. You could issue any credential for anything, and you can decide what the data is that goes in that credential, and away you go. Also, organizations can now have their own digital identities. This is a massive problem. It takes months and thousands and thousands and thousands to do KYC for an organization, know your customer checks for an organization that wants a bank account, because they haven't got a digital identity for the organization. So organizations can prove things about themselves too. And as a special bonus, there's a real killer feature that's not really been possible before. For every online relationship I have, it can now be a unique, secure, and private relationship, a secure connection, individually separate for every relationship I have. So my digital relationship with my bank is like an impenetrable tunnel between the two of us. My bank knows it's me, I know it's my bank, and there's nobody in the middle. So it's a bit like the bank has a secure bat phone to each customer. And that connection can be used for anything. So in the protocol we're going to talk about shortly, it's used for exchanging digital credentials, but you can use it for sending documents, you can use it for chatting, you can use it for authenticating a customer to get rid of usernames and passwords. So the world for people changes significantly for the better. They get more convenience, they get better security. So, imagine a world where you don't need any usernames or passwords anymore. You don't need to fill in registration forms because you've got the data. You just say, look, it's me. Here it is. It's me coming back. You can register and buy things with one click. And because you have these trusted, secure relationships, you know that if a connection or message coming from someone, you know who it's coming from. Okay. Finally, you can, as a person, you can verify the other end as well as them verifying you. And for organizations, huge benefits. You can finally achieve a combined goal of reducing friction and increasing security. And there's a complete transformation for customer experience. So imagine a retailer who can onboard a new customer in 5 seconds with verifiable delivery address and age data as well as payment details. Imagine how their costs and their user experience will enable them to outcompete other retailers who still have people typing in data and getting fraud on bad stolen credit cards and so on. And because of the way that this unique private connection is established between each individual, the retailer has a persistent connection to that customer and can recognize that customer across any of their silos when they come back. So this revolution in user experience is going to be because so many pieces of friction are removed. They're pieces of friction we've all got used to and we all hate because we haven't seen a better way to do it. So, well, all sounds great. Why haven't we got it already? How do we get there? Well, we need a new open protocol like the internet that can be used by everyone and isn't owned by anyone. And this protocol, it needs to be as ubiquitous as some of these that power the internet, that power email, that power websites and power Wi-Fi, something that's non-proprietary. So anyone can build on top of it. Okay, just like at the moment, you can build any website you want, right? If it's HTML, any browser can read it. So we've gone into a world with these connection brokers creating their own proprietary protocols and their own silos, and never you shall be allowed to leave because your stuff is not portable. This new world of open protocols for verifiable credentials and identifiers can be usable by everyone for anything. And whenever I present some data about myself using this protocol, it's only going to be useful if the recipient or the relying party, as we call them, can do 4 checks. And those 4 checks are: who issued that credential to me? Right? Did it really come from the UK Passport Office? And did they give it only to me and I haven't stolen it from anyone else? They want to know that it's not being tampered with in transit. They need to know that what was given to me and what I'm presenting is what originally came from the Passport Office. They also need to know if it's been revoked. So for efficiency, speed and scale, what you can't do here is have connections and APIs and contracts with every possible passport office in the world, every driving license authority in the world, every utility company in the world, because obviously that doesn't scale. So you need to be able to do those checks without having to contact the credential issuer. And also, if you don't have to contact the credential issuer, it means that the privacy of the identity holder is retained. And what that means is that if if the driving license authority is able to see everywhere I'm presenting my driving license, they're going to build up a picture of everything I do, and that's actually none of their business. So you need to do these checks without having to contact the issuer. And that's what this protocol needs to do. So this new protocol has to let you set up, firstly, private, unique, and secure connections without needing a connection broker or an intermediary to do it for you. And it then also lets people, organizations, and things issue, hold, and verify credentials. You also need a bit of storage, okay? You need somewhere to store the keys of the credential issuers that let you do those 4 checks on the previous slide. This storage is just a database, okay? But you need to work out whose database it is. You could put all these issuer keys of the passport offices and the driving license authorities and the banks of the world, you could put them in an Excel spreadsheet, and this would work, okay? The protocol on top would work. But, of course, somebody could tamper with that spreadsheet. Who owns it? So, okay, well, maybe let's put it in the UK government database, but then does Brazil trust that? Or maybe you put it on Google Drive, or put it in a Facebook file, okay? But who would trust those when there's one entity in charge and there's an admin and there's a backdoor and there's the ability to change it? Then you've got a problem. So what is needed is a database with certain characteristics, a storage area with no backdoors, with no admin, and run by many organizations around the world rather than just one. Many organizations who adhere to certain rules about how they behave, and this storage has to be tamper resistant and it has to be chronologically ordered, so you know you're going to get the right most recent key for a certain issuer. And those are the characteristics of a distributed ledger, or otherwise known as a blockchain. So let's go back in time slightly here with a bit of history. So Evernym, the company I work for, we created a code base called Hyperledger Indy, which is the protocol. It's not all our work. We were built on incredible work done by teams around the world over 20 years looking at how you could do this, how does the crypto work, and so on. But we realized, having created this code base, we couldn't own it. So we open sourced it and we gave it away. And the code base is called Hyperledger Indy. And to create the decentralized store that I was talking about for issuer keys and ensure it was trustworthy, we set up something called the Sovereign Foundation in September 26. And they established the Sovereign Network, which a bit like the internet, it's a global public utility, but built specifically for self-sovereign identity. Now, the Sovereign Foundation is a small not-for-profit organization whose focus is to work for the network stewards that run the network and administer the rules of that network. Okay, the Sovereign Foundation doesn't run any technology themselves. What they do is they make sure that the network and the people running it runs according to certain rules. So there are policies, there are approaches about what happens when something goes wrong and so on. So with Hyperledger Indy, we've got hundreds of developers all around the world, code commits, thousands of those, and there's an active, engaged community. And for the Sovereign Network itself, there's over 70 volunteer organizations who've said, hey, this thing is going to be amazing if it exists. I volunteer, I would like to run a node, and they sign up to do that. And they sign a document that confirms they're going to adhere to the governance framework for the network. And these are some of them. You've got massive companies, you've got smaller companies, you've got a whole variety, you've got airlines, you've got telcos, you've got financial organizations, you've got NGOs, and this is just a fraction of them. Obviously, technology companies like Cisco and IBM in there as well. So it's amazing. We've been stunned by this. Evernym is one of the stewards. We don't run the Sovereign Network. We are one steward. Okay. The Hyperledger code base, by the way, Hyperledger is an initiative by the Linux Foundation, and it's a place where there are many open source ledger projects. And coming out of Hyperledger Indy are 2 more code bases, Hyperledger Ursa which is the crypto, the amazing crypto that makes things like zero knowledge proofs work. So that's available for everyone to use, regardless of whether you have to use Indy or not. And just announced last week is Hyperledger Aries, which separates out the protocol for peer-to-peer connections, wallets, messaging, and key management to make it ledger agnostic. So that was released by the Sovereign Foundation recently. Again, fantastic work there. So as I said earlier, this technology transcends geographies and market sectors. So I'm just going to give you some examples of some of the projects that we've been involved in that are happening in the ecosystem. So this first one is Barclaycard, which is part of the Barclays Group, international banking group. And they are a merchant acquirer. They have many thousands of retailers. And they were looking at, could they use this technology to make it possible for one-click, secure, verifiable onboarding and payment for retailers. So you go to a retailer website, just select what you want to buy, click a button, and all the data that you need to provide to sign up and onboard and pay is done through an exchange of verifiable credentials in about 5 seconds. Shopping cart abandonment, chargebacks, and fraud, that's what they were looking at as the problems to solve. The next one, just to show how varied this is an organizational identity example. So it's about supply chain authentication. Novartis, a massive global pharmaceutical company, and they want to know that every organization in their supply chain is properly certified. So those organizations need identity, and they need credentials that say they don't use child labor, they adhere to the right environmental standards, and so on. So again, it's credential exchange through secure connections. A real popular one is know your customer checks. If you can onboard a customer to a bank in 40 seconds instead of 40 minutes, then you're onto a good thing. And if you can onboard them with verifiable data that you can know has come from the right place, and you can do that onboarding digitally, with the person just responding to a request on their phone for them to share data with you, then you can get that onboarding done really quickly, but also you have a persistent connection to that customer from then on. And the last one here is trusted digital identity for doctors. So here's an employee onboarding use case, but in this case, the employees are doctors, who are the most trusted profession in the world, and also one of the highest or most credentialed people in the world as well. And this is happening in the UK. It typically takes half a day for a doctor to verify they're a doctor with lots of pieces of paper and so on. And they want to do that instantly and remotely. So they know the doctor is a doctor. They know when the doctor turns up at the hospital that they're properly credentialed to do the job, they have the right clinical training, and so on. One last example, which is another organizational identity example, British Columbia and Ontario, the governments there in those Canadian provinces. Amazingly, they've issued 7-8 million organizational credentials already using the live sovereign ledger. And because these credential issuance transactions and the verification transactions, they never touch the ledger, the number of ledger entries these guys have had to write to issue millions of credentials, something like 8. Okay, so all that you need to write onto the ledger if you're an issuer is an identifier and a credential definition. And with that, you can issue 50 billion credentials if you want to, without writing any more to the ledger. And that gives you massive scale benefits. So as you can see, many organizations trying lots of different things with lots of different use cases. Underpinning it all is the same protocol. Okay, same protocol for credential issuance, verification, and holding, whether you're a person, organization, or thing. So coming to the end of the formal part of the session here, getting involved, how do you start? So you can obviously just go off to Hyperledger Indy, you can Google it, there's getting started guides there and so on. But if you want to get moving really quickly, Evernym have set up an initiative called the Accelerator, and we've got over 30 organizations in there already, and they can get going really quickly. You might think, what's Evernym's business model? So we've given a load of stuff away, you know, millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of work we've given away. Our business model is to provide enterprises with the tools and utilities and products they need to use self-sovereign identity really quickly. You can build your own. You can go to anywhere to get it. If you don't want to build it, you can buy from somebody. We have the first products in the market. We have organizations who are using the technology and the products that we provided with them to put proof of concepts together in 30 minutes. Okay. Plus, you get training, you get access to the experts in Evernym, and you also get to be part of a community, a bigger community. These are some of the people in the accelerator working together right now to solve some of the gnarliest, most difficult problems that we have. So the Evernym Accelerator is a great way to get started, and obviously we can help you with that. But of course, you can just go off and do it yourself if you want to as well. That's not a problem. Our ambition is in opening all of this up, for everyone to be able to benefit, because we think that when people have their own self-sovereign identities, the online world is going to get transformed. So that's the end of the formal part of the presentation. So Alex, can I just switch back to you to do a bit of Q&A and cue me up, and I'll answer those as you ask them.
So yeah, it looks like we have quite a few here. The first one, can you help practitioners understand what questions to ask when thinking about an SSI or DID solution? And as a part two, there seem to be a lot of players, Uport, Civic, Sovereign, Self-Key, etc. How are they all different?
Yeah, that's a cracking question, actually. So it would take some time to go into how they're all different, or how many of them actually, doing the same sort of thing. The first thing to point out is that we're actively encouraging work in this area. Part of the reason we've open sourced all of our stuff is that we can help people and people who might think are our competitors to use this technology. So it's not ours anymore. Okay, it's there for everybody to use. We're just the guys that open sourced it. It would take a long time to cover off each of these. Some of them have different approaches in terms of what they put on the ledger, on whichever ledger they use, and what they don't put on the ledger. Some have different protocols they use. Some, if the company went away, your identity goes away. So there are different different answers to the question, probably. The thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to denigrate any of these folks, because everyone is trying to do the same thing. And like the early days of any sort of initiative, standards will prevail. Open standards are the best thing. So what I'd encourage you to do is ask about people's use of decentralized identifier standards. Ask people what goes on the ledger. Ask them if your company goes bust, what happens to people's identities? Can they work without you? That kind of thing, I think, would be good.
Okay. And then this is another two-part question. How is the adoption of this technology expected to happen? And then what industries will lead the way?
Yeah, so again, that's a good question, because we've got a network effect here. And as with any network effect, it has to start somewhere. So the good news is that a single organization can start benefiting from self-sovereign identity immediately without needing anybody else. We're seeing that in the US with a project with the credit unions called CU Ledger. The idea there is that a credit union will be able to give its customers a self-sovereign identity. Okay? So if they're a member of the credit union, maybe some information about their name, their address, and so on. But what that's going to be used for is for the customer to authenticate when they come back to the credit union, whether they call in, walk in, or log in. And that means that the friction as part of the authentication process for the credit union is massively reduced. They have a consistent user experience. But then there could be millions of credit union customers walking around with verifiable data about their name, their address, date of birth, the fact they're a member of the credit union, and so on. And then suddenly retailers might go, oh, that's kind of interesting. I could onboard those people in like 5 seconds with verifiable data. So why don't I start doing that? And so it grows and it grows. Another example would be those doctor identity project in the UK, where they're looking at giving doctors verifiable credentials about their identity, the fact they've got a medical degree, what their qualifications are, what their clinical capabilities are, and so on. And then suddenly you've got thousands of doctors walking around with verifiable identities that they could use anywhere as well. So you're going to start seeing these ecosystems start on their own, and then they're going to start interlocking, and then they're going to grow and multiply. So that's how that network effect is going to kick off.
We have another question. Are there any US government entities, state, local, federal agencies testing the platform?
That's a good question. I could say we don't know, actually, because it's not our platform. so there could well be plenty of US government organizations testing this stuff. There's some things that we have that are commercially sensitive. I can tell you about some work we did with the Department of Homeland Security, who are very interested in ensuring that this technology is done right for people. So you might think that's kind of interesting that DHS getting involved, but what they want to do is make sure that this technology, as it progresses and rolls out, that people can use it in the right way. And they have ways to do backup and recovery and so on and so on. So they provided a grant to us to design what's called a decentralized key management system, which is fantastic. That project's completed now. The best way to answer that is that there's a lot going on. The Canadian governments, so the provincial governments in Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, are being pretty public about what they're doing, so have a look at them. But again, it's not our platform. It's open source. People can use our products if they want to, or they can write their own. So I've no doubt lots of people in lots of government organizations around the world are busy looking at this stuff, but we don't necessarily know all of them.
Perfect. And then what exactly happens in the accelerator program, and what is the expected outcome?
Yeah, so the accelerator is designed to give people the tools that they could otherwise spend many months having to develop themselves. Evernym's business, you might be thinking, how have we, we've given all this stuff away, how do we make money? And we've spent many, many millions creating this open source capability. Our business is to provide products for enterprises that make it really easy to use. It doesn't mean you have to use Evernym. You could go and buy your own or make your own or build your own. But our business is to provide those products for enterprises, and we also have the consumer apps and consumer agents that enable people to use it as well. So the accelerator lets people get access to those and really the idea is to get from proof of concept really quickly. So we've had people doing proof of concepts in like 30 minutes. You can set up a credential exchange capability and demonstrate it to someone. You can then make it pretty, you can link it into back-end systems and integrators and so on and so on. But the idea is we get people through the POC, the pilot stage, as fast as possible so they can get to production, because the first people who get to production are going to have a significant competitive advantage against all of their competitors. So imagine a retailer who can onboard a customer in 5 seconds with verifiable data to allow them to onboard and pay. So it's like Amazon one-click for every retailer. The first retailer that does that is going to do much better than the others. So there's going to be a significant competitive advantage in moving quickly, and the accelerator is there to help people do that.
And then next up, as a software developer, where do I start to learn how to use this stuff? Do I just start with Indy, or do you have a way to play with and test the identity system?
Yeah, so there's probably 3 answers to that. If you want, you can dive into the Hyperledger Indy GitHub, and you can just do everything yourself. You don't need Evernym, you can just press ahead, and there's plenty of people doing that. Some of the innovation coming out of the open source world is great. We love developers to actually contribute back as well. So if you've got some ideas, just put it in the open source code. Maybe you're a developer for an organization that has some budget, and then if you want to get going fast with some tuition and some ready-made packages that let you get moving really quickly, then you can join the accelerator. And Otherwise, you might want something rather more tailored to exactly what it is you're looking for. So ourselves and other organizations offer custom projects that are, you design around particular use cases. So there's pretty those three sides, going from zero money to a bit of money to maybe a bit more money.
And then the next one, do you think adoption will require 100% access to smartphone technology, particularly for government ID providers, or do you see both paper and SSI somehow coexisting?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And you could ask that question about the internet as well. Okay, so there's still people, people who can't use the internet. There's some really interesting work going on at the moment. Actually, in the accelerator, we have 6 NGOs, the biggest of them being the International Foundation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, and others as well. They're looking at this very problem from a position of refugees and dispossessed people who, they don't have a smartphone, they have nothing. So there's a concept called guardianship that's built into the protocol that is there to allow someone who doesn't have the technology to still establish a place to hold credentials they can get. So if it was like a refugee credential from UNHCR or an aid credential from the Red Cross or whatever it may be, they can have somewhere to store that that is operated by what we call a guardian. And guardianship, it's a concept that would work for refugees, but also, if you have a baby, right, newborn baby, you get the birth certificate. You don't give the birth certificate to the baby because they would probably eat it. So the parents hold it. The parents are the guardian of it. And when the baby grows up and gets to 18 or whatever, the parents give the person, their child, the identity documents that they built up over their life. So guardianship is a bit like that. So for people who don't have phones, there is a guardianship model that allows them to trust somebody else to do it. But again, you're still going to need paper credentials in circumstances. So you're not going to sort of suddenly have paper credentials disappearing overnight. What we do need to do, though, is be very aware of the potential adverse effects of digital credential ecosystem, whereby people who don't have digital credentials somehow miss out. So that is something that people are concerned about quite rightly. And as a community, we need to work out how to handle that and how to provide people with the capability, even though they may not have the technology.
Can you provide a brief example or insights on decentralized ID for refugees coming from failed estates where records of the individuals are no longer available from authority sources?
Yeah, actually, there's a really good example of that. One of the sovereign stewards is an organization called Tobin, based in Holland, founded by a guy who was in Kuwait when Saddam Hussein invaded. And he got out, but all of his stuff was destroyed. And the university he studied at was destroyed, and he had nothing. And he managed to get to the Netherlands and had to establish a new identity for himself. And he set up Tobin, from personal experience, to solve this problem for people who have their paper credentials, if they had any, destroyed. So I mentioned about digital credentials having superpowers. One thing you can do with them is you can back them up somewhere. And in a situation where you might have a government who suddenly changes and becomes I don't know, malicious in some way, and you need to get out, if you have nothing, but you can still get somewhere eventually and get a phone and restore your wallet, those credentials will still exist. The fact that the university you went to has been destroyed doesn't mean your credential goes away, because you have it. It's like a piece of paper you have with you with some special cryptographic signatures on it. So you still have it and you still keep it. You can recover it, go and use it again, and it can still be verifiable, because the relying party who checks it, they don't need to go back to the issuer. The issuer is no longer there, so they can't go back to them, but they can still verify it and do those 4 checks I mentioned.
And we're running a little long, but I think we'll do one last question. What are the key success factors for SSI adoption and usage?
Wow, okay. So that's like saying, what are the key success factors for internet adoption and usage, right? I think the main thing that we've seen so far is to have an engaged community of people working on this stuff. When we started back in 2016, I stood up at conferences saying this new thing is coming. It's going to be huge. People, we said, well, do you know what we're going to do? We're going to create a network, and that'll be a global utility, and it'll be free, and organizations from around the world are going to volunteer to run it. People thought we were absolutely nuts. But there it is. And it's about creating that community and having people like you involved in it. So there's nothing to stop you getting involved. There's nothing to stop you writing code. There's nothing to stop you running a node on the network. There's nothing to stop you experimenting and playing. And I noticed one more question actually in here. If I can just take that one, Alex.
Yep.
Is there a way for me as a user to test Evernym at this stage? So yeah, there is actually. So in the UK, US, and Canada, in the Apple App Store and Google Play Store, you can download the live Evernym app called connect.me, powered by Sovereign. So it links to the live Sovereign ledger, and it's been live for probably 2 years now. And if you go to a website called try.connect.me, that will actually take you through a little demo use case for you to get some credentials and use them to prove various things. So try.connect.me, and that'll show you where to go in the app stores as well. It's a demo. We've only just built it, so no caveats. Sorry, no guarantees on SLAs or anything like that. As with anything brand new, but you can go ahead and have a look at that. And also, if you look in the app in the menu, there's something called Onfido in there, which is a well-known verifier of identities. So you can get a real credential about yourself that's verified by Onfido, who do credential verification for banks and financial institutions around the world, and use your passport, driving license, ID card to do that. So go and have a play. Be interesting to see how you get on. But also, just you can build your own stuff as well.
Perfect. Well, with that, I think we are out of time or a little after, but Andy, thank you for a great presentation. And thank all of you for taking time out of your day to attend. I know for some of you, this is very early or very late in the day.
Thank you very much, folks, for joining. Much appreciated.